It's like,
Yeah, well, I think the police are totally overwhelmed. I see them come and take reports sometimes, but what's that going to do?
yeah, well, and if the DA isn't really interested in prosecuting,
Mm,
it's like, what, you're kind of handcuffed at that point.
yeah.
So, yep. So, but hey, I'm glad that, I think some people get really frustrated and upset with that. And for those that are watching, this is the pre-show, so Will and I are just chit-chatting away. But it's almost like you need different cities doing different things so that you can get real world results, right? You sway too much one way and you go, oh, okay, maybe we do need a little bit more whatever it is in order to minimize what's going on. And then you've got other people that are, it's the total opposite, where it's like, you don't even want to mess with anybody here because you might get shot because you don't know who's carrying a gun.
Yeah.
There's certain parts
and,
of Idaho or Texas where I'm sure there's certain little towns that nobody would ever consider doing that.
Yeah. And contrast exists for a reason, right? There's a good reason for the evolution of our species and for thought. I would guess that we're not all exactly the same everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
So we can kind of look at, like you're saying, something and see if it's working, and if it's not, and then adopt it or evolve it or reject it completely.
Right. If you want some real fun, Netflix, it's kind of a docu-series, I guess. I just finished watching it last night. It's really good. It is How to Become a Dictator. I think that's what it's called, How to Become a Dictator.
And not familiar. That sounds interesting, though.
Yeah, it's relatively new, and essentially they took the approach of creating a playbook for dictatorship and using real-world examples. So, you've got Hitler, you've got whoever's the family in North Korea, a couple of people from Russia.
Kim Jong-un.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. They talk about how the rise of power, but they do it as a playbook. So chapter 1 is you got to do such and such. Let's look at so-and-so and how they accomplished this. And then they ran into a problem. Oh, don't worry about that. You just got to refer back to the playbook and see how you handle that. Very, very interesting. And kind of looking at some recent leaderships that we've had. And then as they're talking about this playbook, you're like, oh my gosh, somebody's been reading the playbook. Something's going on here.
Yeah, well, we got a fan club. I know, forget if it was leading up to the election or during it, but, President Trump used to talk about Mussolini a lot.
And with Mussolini, we are officially live on the show. Congratulations.
That's how it always goes. The Mussolini lead in.
Mussolini leads in, and with that, welcome to the no fuck. I see, I screwed it up, and I hit the other button too, which I wasn't supposed to do. You take a week off, and all these crazy things happen. Welcome to the No Fucks Given podcast, living your authentic life. I'm Ryan. That's Will. How's it going today, sir?
I'm doing well, man. It's good to be back.
Definitely good to be back. I hear that the heat wave is crushing you guys in San Francisco, this crazy heat wave that we're having in the Northwest.
It's horrible. Yeah, it's a sweltering 52 right now. I just checked, and it's been horrible. It's getting the fog I've been waiting for this whole time. Funny that it comes in, the heat wave and during summer, but here we are.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan personally, so it doesn't bother me.
Of the fog.
Yeah.
Not the heat wave.
No. Yeah. I know you and I hold polar opposites on this, which is good. This is good, you know. Contrast is important.
Contrast is important. We were just talking about that earlier. Sonoma County, up here in Sonoma County, it hasn't been bad at all. It's actually, and it's been cold at night. It's amazing the temperature swing. where you go from maybe high 70s, low 80s right now, and I think it's dropping
Yeah.
down into the 50s overnight, or low 60s at least, which is kind of what I enjoy. I like if it's going to be hot during the day, but then I want that cool breeze, that ocean breeze to kick in, and be able to cool off and sleep in a cool room at night. So I
That makes
do
sense.
appreciate that. Um, we're not going to
You
talk
like to
about
be
sleeping
you
though.
like to be out hiking all the time. I can't
I
believe you
do.
want to be hiking in 100-degree weather. That
Yeah,
sounds brutal.
90 is like a good starting for me, and then
Hmm.
if it gets warmer, more the better. So as long as you're not
Yeah.
just standing, there's a difference if you're just sitting or standing in the heat, no fun. But as long as I'm
Yeah.
moving or doing something, then it's all good for me personally. But
And this is what
not
happens.
everybody's that way.
You take 1 week off, and now all we got is the weather to talk about.
That's all we got. That's all we got.
Yeah.
But we are going to talk about. I did take a trip to Wisconsin, as you know,
Hmm.
visited some family, was in the Midwest. I forget how many days. It was like 10 or 11 days back there. That's going to tie in potentially to what we're going to talk about today, which let's go ahead and load that up. There is an article that I ran across on Fast Company, and it talks about how neuroscience reveals how a year of social distancing broke our brains. So,
Mm.
I know for me personally, I'm kind of curious where people stand because it seems as I'm talking to friends and family, some people are very much like, oh my gosh, get me out there. I am so excited. Let's go have fun. I am ready to be with people again. And then there's other people that are like, yeah, but I'm still a little nervous, not sure if I want to be in crowds and those types of things. So
And hopefully they're saying it in that Oprah kind of way that you were just doing, because that's funny in my head.
yeah,
But yeah,
I mean, some people, I've got a couple of people who are total social butterflies, and
yeah,
they're just like, and I guess since I already brought up the traveling, um, 4th of July weekend, because I left whatever the weekend before 4th of July, but they had record setting travel 4th of July weekend. There was actually more people flying on this last year than in 2019. So we're talking higher numbers than pre
really.
COVID. Yeah. So people were out, created some issues. Fortunately, I didn't get caught up in that. All my flights worked out. I was able to get a rental car company, but I know a lot of people had canceled flights. Rental car companies were running out of cars because
Hmm.
during 2020 they had to shut everything down, and now all of a sudden it's like, oh, the world's opened up again, so many people are going, they just don't have all the resources and the infrastructure built up for it. So I think it's going to be an
Interesting.
interesting travel year,
Yeah, totally.
to
And
say the least.
it's
um,
it's kind of side note, but still relevant that it's like we're opening up big time in America, but the world is still not normal, so to speak. It's like
right,
we're gonna watch the Olympics in Japan, which just banned spectators because
right,
they're in such a state of, or with a national state of emergency. So
right.
it's really interesting the way it fluctuates depending on where you are geographically right now as well.
Right. Yeah. And I
But
remember talking to people in Australia back in 2020 who, because they had locked down, the individual states locked down. I think the borders within Australia had locked down
oh,
that,
really?
yeah, that they didn't travel. And so they were able to control everything quite well. And I forget exactly when it was, but I was talking to a guy. It was actually through NLP. I was TAing at the time. And he goes, yeah, I just went to a stadium. We had 50,000 people. And this is mid to late 2020. I forget exactly when it was, for a big rugby match. And it was one of the big games that everybody was excited, but they had zero cases at the time. So it was no issue. So yeah, but it's interesting because for a lot of people, it's been over 12 months of varying levels of complete lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
How many people did they see or not see? How much time was spent on Zoom? And so kind of talking about that neuroplasticity, if you will, of the brain. And here they say on this one, I love this subtitle. It says, too much time alone can make your social thermostat feel like it's on the fritz. And I think there's a lot of people that are dealing with that. And kind of one of the things I wanted to start this off with are these two paragraphs here, where it says in a national survey last fall that about 30%, 36% of adults in the US and 61% of young adults felt or reported feeling seriously lonely. And I know
Yeah.
that was a big thing. How many people had, I think they call them dark thoughts during that time.
Okay.
I don't know if it's anything that has to do with suicide, maybe, where you kind of get really into those dark thoughts. Those numbers spiked quite a bit. And then the second part is kind of like, okay, hey, now that we're opening up, we can actually go out to dinner now if we want to. Concert venues are starting to open up. However, nearly half of Americans are reporting feeling uneasy about returning to in-person interactions, regardless of where you stand on vaccinations. So it's
So
kind of an interesting dilemma where people are at.
You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't, kind of. Right.
Well, especially if you're like, oh, I feel really lonely, and yet I really feel uneasy about going out into public social gatherings. But that's as Carl Buchheit would say, that's quite a pickle you're in, folks.
Yeah, well, it's double coverage. It's like, what are you going to do when the thing that's making you feel bad, the cure for it, also brings up its own different kind of anxiety and problems as well, whether that's a bit of social phobia or fear of COVID or, just unfamiliar, out of practice, socialization that we haven't been doing as much. It's like,
I'm personally curious how much of that really plays into it. You talk to people that maybe got married at an early age and then 15, 20 years later they get divorced and they're like, okay, I'm ready to date again. But I haven't done it for so long. I don't know what to expect. Kind of nervous. So I'm wondering, is that kind of the same thing with the situation where people have been out of practice for so long, like you were saying, being social, that they're just like, oh, I'm just not sure because it's been so long.
Yeah, I think that have to be part of it. I couldn't tell you how much it was for everyone or if that's what's going on for everyone, but I do know from personal experience and just from looking into it that sometimes these things that the problem, let's say, take depression, for example, like a huge, I don't know if antidote's the right word, but we'll just use it. One of the things that really helps with depression is being social. And even like, you kind of have to force yourself to do it almost. And that's not always the right move, but a lot of the time it can be helpful. Right. But when you're in a depressive cycle or run some sort of low level to mid level depression all the time, it actually like locks out the thing that will make it better naturally. It's like you want to just be by yourself. You want to be alone. You don't want to go be social. It takes energy. You're embarrassed. You're ashamed. There's all kinds of things going on. But if you did, it just has this kind of positive grenade effect on the depression.
Right.
And this is a bit of what's going on too for a lot of people, I'd imagine. It's just, there's conflicting scientific advice, not largely conflicting about like where we're at with COVID, the Delta variant. Are you 100% safe if you're vaccinated? All these kind of things play into it as well.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting. So you think about depression as an example. If someone was dealing with low-level depression in early 2020, January, February, those types of things, and then the world kind of really shifts. It's, what if you had, I don't know, let's just say 10% of the population at kind of a low level space, is, is that kind of the catalyst that you need to take that depression to the next level. And then to actually have to live through it for however, what was it, 14 months or so. It's like, that's a long time for the brain to kind of be taught that this is not a new norm per se, but it's kind of like you have to exist in this new way of being. And so I could imagine that'd make it even harder to get past that trigger of just being able to get out, be active, do something social, just because of the time. It's not like it was just, you got to stay quarantined for a week because you've got pink eye. We're talking 14 months. That's a long time.
Yeah, and when it was going on, it was unclear how long it would be going on for.
Right.
Which is much different than having a finite end date.
Yeah, very much so.
So we're talking about the neuroplasticity of it. It's like our brains learn to be a certain way going through the trauma and the stress and the anxiety of something we've never experienced as a species. Very few people on the planet live through, the Spanish flu pandemic and this pandemic. There was a long time in between the two. So this is brand new for almost everyone.
Right.
And that's really intense. And then the other fallout of that, the social isolation, the lockdowns, the financial instability, the job instability, like it all comes and plays into this.
All right. Yeah. And it's interesting how I think different people have been affected. I mean, we talked in one of our earlier episodes about, our Americans kind of becoming weak, if you will. And we talked about the fact that, a generation before or after the Vietnam War really hasn't been exposed to anything really catastrophic long term, where, Vietnam War was ongoing. I don't know exactly how long. Then you go back to World War II was ongoing for a long time. World War I. So there's these events that happen in life that really threw all societies in kind of a complete disarray, if you will, where there was major change and shifts. For generations like myself, this is the first time we've had to deal with something like that. So it's also kind of interesting, and I don't know, it would be interesting to see the numbers if how the baby boomers were affected versus a younger generation. And because because they've struggled in the past, they've had to deal with other uncertainty and they survived it. Did the critter brain then go, hey, this is a little uncomfortable, but you've done this before, not a problem. Versus a younger generation or somebody who hasn't had to deal with that is, that critter brain's freaking out a little bit, going, hold it. This is really uncomfortable and I don't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to know. And it's that old saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, is really like mostly inaccurate. It's like, I guess that's good if you're playing sports and, you're getting roughed up and progressing every day. But most of the time, things that are really traumatic, how they play out really depends on the person. It's a very personal thing. So. And again, when you mentioned Vietnam War and the wars for that mandatory conscription element of it really had a larger effect. I mean, America's been at war a huge part of my life. I don't know, maybe more than half of it. Mm-hmm. But since it doesn't have mandatory conscription and it's kind of been normalized and not even talked about very much, it's almost like we haven't been at war for a very long time, even though we have been.
Right.
So it's interesting how these different things play out.
Yeah, and nice pointing that out in the sense that, because I'm thinking with everybody was very much against the I lost the word with Vietnam, that you're going to be drafted, right? There's a lot of people that seemed like, if I get drafted and I go to Vietnam, my chances of coming home alive are not good. And then But you go back a little bit farther, World War One, World War Two, where it was like, oh, we we don't have rubber, we don't have metal, you can't use copper, all of these things because they had to put all those resources into the war effort. So there was a um, there was a big impact where, yeah, the recent wars that we've gone through, there really hasn't been a big impact on society. There hasn't been an uprising where people are yelling and screaming in the streets of, you know, don't send those kids. I mean, there was some, but there wasn't a lot, so it didn't have the same impact. Where 2020, I don't know how anybody wasn't impacted in some way.
Yeah, I would have to imagine there's not a chance that almost everyone on the planet has been affected in some way,
Right.
positive or negative or both.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the fallout of it we'll have to see for a really long time. It'll be really interesting. There could
Mm-hmm.
be a lot of positive things that come from this. We'll just have to see what happens.
Right. Yeah.
Part of it, we talked in one of our shows. I think one of my teachers called it. Everyone was forced to microdose on death a bit, which I thought was
Mm.
really a weird and funny way to put it, but it's kind of true. It's like if you're locked down and you're facing an invisible, almost omnipresent enemy that is a virus. It's like,
Right.
well, what does that look like, and where does that live? Um, Potentially anywhere, right? In the beginning, people were washing their groceries and
Mm-hmm.
disinfecting their Amazon packages and stuff.
Yeah. And I know people
Um,
were leaving packages like outdoors in the sun for a couple of days before
yeah.
they'd even bring them in the house and open them.
Mhm. Yeah, so all this stuff has an effect. Like the people who lived through the Great Depression, that kind of stayed with them for the rest of their lives. They
Right.
stored money in the walls or buried it or thought in some way like that, just because no one thought the system would crash and fail them then. How do you know it couldn't happen again, kind
Sure.
of thing?
Right. Right.
It gets
Yeah.
locked in our minds and we need to stay safe about it. And this will have a similar ish kind of thing.
Right. Well, hopefully we're not putting bodies in walls and different places, though.
Hopefully, although that was happening before the pandemic too,
That is
and a
true.
lot of trends in like social isolation and loneliness. This was happening before the pandemic.
Right.
No doubt, the pandemic exacerbated it and extended it to people in a population that would never have maybe felt that way or had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a world phenomena in our species right now. It's not because of the pandemic or because of the government response to it. It was just extended a bit by what happened.
Right.
But social isolation, especially in the younger population, and loneliness as an epidemic was already going on.
Right.
So, and
Right.
I don't
And
know why. I don't know if people really do know why, which is kind of what's
I
most frightening
I
about
would
it.
I
But
would imagine it has a lot to do with technology, as far
yeah,
as,
yeah.
am I truly connected as
Hmm.
we do this all day long?
Yeah,
Um,
social media being the potato chips of socialization.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because I mean, it's just not natural. It's not the way the brain was designed to um, interact and commingle. I mean, there's so much value from that face to face, one on one time. Um, so I think that's a whole nother subject, because then we can get into bullying and all those types of things. And
Oh, oh yeah.
there's
It's
so
a
much,
huge topic.
yeah, there's so much value in having different degrees of people in your life, because then you learn balance. It's like,
Mhm.
if you don't know what really good people are and you don't know what really bad people are, how what are the bumpers then that you learn to live within? So anyhow,
Yeah.
different conversation, but it is interesting um, where people are at. And even just, we were talking before the show, as far as with my trip, I went to Wisconsin, it was in the Midwest, and really there was no presence of mass or anything. So I still see it a lot where a lot of the employees were, when I'm in Sonoma County, a lot of the employees are still wearing masks. And I don't know if it's a mandate or anything like that, but where I was going, and I was in big towns, little towns, mid-sized towns. So we did a lot of traveling, and you didn't see it. And so people were not as concerned. And I don't know a lot about the Midwest as far as how they dealt with 2020 either. As far
Yeah, I
as,
don't either.
how important was it for them to wear masks during 2020 or not? And it'll be interesting as time rolls on to just kind of see how different regions of the United States, um, where the mental health is of people, as we
Mhm.
start doing the surveys and doing the follow-ups and those types of things. Because you're still seeing masks where you're at, are you not, when you go out?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's still a fair amount of masking in San Francisco, which, like, I haven't been out much in the last year and a half outside of here, so I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what it was like other places, but um, there was definitely a lot of mask wearing going on during the pandemic, and much less so now. But still, you see it a lot in like grocery stores, indoors,
Right.
employees, when people are, when I go to the grocery store, most people are still wearing masks. When I go walk in the park, most people aren't anymore, but some people still are.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough.
Right. Right.
So I
Yeah.
think, and I don't know, I kind of haven't been checking the numbers in a while, but so I don't know where they're at. But San Francisco was almost at zero for a while.
Oh,
So
really? I didn't know that.
yeah, I think there was a while where we were just like 8 cases or something,
Mm-hmm.
completely negligible. But,
Right. All right. Not bad. So the question is, has 2020 broken our brains?
well, that would be what the sizzling headline would lead us to believe. But if you read the article,
And is there hope?
it's only to. Oh yes, good
That's
points.
really the big question, right?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of hope. I think a lot of the research we're pointing to in almost every regard for a lot of things. I don't want to say everything all the time about the brain, but
Right.
we're starting to find that the brain's incredibly adaptable, and things can be changed and can be repaired given enough time and enough attention and enough skill and science and enough right things done. Like, our minds are incredibly malleable. The research behind neuroplasticity is really stunning. Um,
Yeah. And
it's
it's
interesting to look at, right? Because
yeah,
we
it
grow up and we learn stuff, and we
right.
just say, "Oh, this is who I am, and this is how things are," and we don't think that you can change that, but you can if you want to.
Right. Right. And kind of talking about that neuroplasticity, how the seems like the human body in general, and I think this is across all species. If you don't use it, you lose it. So if you push weights, the muscles that are having to push the weights, they grow. It takes much longer to grow a muscle than it does for it to atrophy if you're not using it. But the same thing happens in the mind. If there's certain parts of the mind that are not being used, they can kind of atrophy a little bit. And while that might seem a little scary, and these are things that they've been able to study and notice, there is that ability, though, if you start using that muscle. So socialization, as an example, if it feels a little uncertain, if it feels a little scary, is that okay? What is kind of like the smallest step or the next best step that one can take for themselves in their
Mhm.
situation in order to increase the amount of socialization, in order to kind of build that muscle within the brain to expand the capacity so that it doesn't have as many negative feelings associated with it. And we can kind of also, I think it's important to kind of remember back to what it was like and
Mhm.
go, okay, let's calibrate to what it was like and how can I move forward to those good feelings, because they were there
Yep.
before. So we can kind of use them as a GPS tool that says, okay, how do I get here in my mind?
Yeah, if you've got those reference memories in your mind, those are super useful,
Mm-hmm.
especially connecting to the feelings associated with them, right? We can
Mm-hmm.
go internal and actually kind of have an experience that the mind and the brain doesn't know the difference of, is this virtual reality or reality. And that's kind of one of the mega powers that we have, actually. That's why athletes, especially at the highest levels, use positive visualization to see themselves winning and doing well and going through the right steps. They see the big picture wins, and they also see how it plays out piece by piece by piece by piece in their minds, and
Right.
that gets them used to doing that. I remember someone told me about a study they did, where they had two groups of basketball players, and half of them just like shot free throws physically, and then half of them shot no free throws, but they visualized shooting free throws for the
Mm.
same amount of time, and then they did like exactly the same, or very very similar when it came
Right.
down to the test, basically in the real world,
Right.
which is
Right.
kind of mind blowing, right? I mean, you have to have
Well,
the
but it,
propensity to want to be a basketball player, right?
yeah,
It wouldn't work for me necessarily, but
I think it would with the right training. Um, and I think you bring up a good point in the fact that if something seems unfamiliar to yourselves, that you don't have to physically do something. So if, let's say, social integration, you're somebody who's kind of in those study numbers that I mentioned earlier, where you're like, hey, I've really felt isolated, really kind of felt loneliness. I want to get out, but it doesn't, it's a little scary. It's like, I'm not really sure where I stand. Is that you don't, in order to train the brain, you don't necessarily have to physically go out in a group of people, but you could actually sit down, meditate, if you will, where you just sit, kind of focus your energy and actually create that story in your mind. And it could be even a past experience, maybe a birthday party or a friend's party, whatever, where you had that socialization, you were having the fun that you were having. And because I don't know how deep we want to go, is it, that just the critter brain doesn't recognize time?
yeah, I mean, mainly
Yeah. So
that's
if
why
the,
it'll keep you stuck forever, keeping you
right.
safe, because it
Yeah.
doesn't even know what time is. It's just
Right.
right now all the
It's
time.
correct. Yeah. So it's an interesting concept if you haven't heard of it, is that all things that have happened to you are happening to you and will happen to you are happening to you now. And so
Ooh,
the
deep.
part, yeah, so the part of the brain that's really responsible for keeping you safe, what we call the critter brain, doesn't recognize time. So even if you think back to an experience that you had, or think forward in a linear time frame to an experience that you would like to have, to that critter brain, it's all happening now. And it's as real is. It doesn't know the difference between, me physically touching a pen versus me imagining touching a pen. As far as the critter brain's concerned, and we're over generalizing and we're making very, very
Yeah.
general things because these are very detailed, complex, um, but it doesn't know the difference. And so one of the things that you can do if you feel like you're dealing with that struggle, you want to get out, but that's maybe too big of a step, is just create that relationship that you want with your friends or with family, whoever it is, and where it's at, and make it as real as possible. Where are you? What time of day is it? Who else is around? What do you hear? What do you see? Are there smells? The more of those sensations that you bring into your mind, it's going to make it more palatable for the critter brain, if you will, and it's going to go, oh yeah, okay, I remember, we can survive this. Not so bad. And the certain parts of your brain that are responsible for happiness and all of that, well, it's kind of working that muscle again. They're like, oh yeah, we do need more of this. And then some of that urgency or fear or anxiety, whatever it might be, will start to dissipate.
Yeah,
Is that a
almost,
fair
and it'll
claim?
almost feel kind of magically.
Yeah.
I think it's fair for the majority of people. I think if there's
Yeah.
something more serious going on, that may not be enough. But
Right.
for as an overarching piece of advice, it would be really, really useful for most
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
If you have a deeper social phobia or something like that, that might not do the trick necessarily,
Right.
but could not do any harm either. So,
Right. Yeah. Because ultimately, it's when we have fear, uncertainty. Let's just stay with this topic, that concern about going in public. It's it's the images and the sounds and the pictures that your mind makes about that experience. That's where the fear is coming from. So the
yeah,
mind is creating this experience that it's like, oh, this is the experience you're going to have. And a lot of times that's not the experience you're going to have. I'm leaving Saturday. I'm going to Idaho, meeting up with family. And then my daughter and I are going to, not going to Colorado, we're going to Montana to go hiking. And there was a gal that got killed by a bear a couple weeks ago or last week,
oh well,
in Colorado or in Montana. And so, of course, my parents are like, "Did you hear about the bear attack?" I'm like, "Yeah." And it does. There is some like,
thanks.
and then the mind starts playing these stories, and it's like, "Oh, well, I'll make sure I have a stick, so I stick it in its mouth when it bites down. I'll have the bear spray." And it's like, well, hold it. How many people go hiking and camping in the wilderness all the time and never have
Yeah,
issues?
it
But
certainly has that lottery winner effect, right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
only you only hear about the really good and the really bad stuff.
right. So then
But
it's
what is it about camping? Like, I know for me and other people I talk, it's like you go camping and all you can think about is bears and serial killers. What's going on,
I've
man?
never even thought about serial killers. That's a new one for
Oh
me.
no. I just installed
Oh,
that phobia in you,
yeah.
I
No,
guess.
no, no. I'm thinking we need to go camping, and I'm gonna hire some actors to come over and have some fun with you.
You didn't grow up listening to like ghost stories where they talk about people went camping next to
Oh
insane
yeah, you had to
asylums
you
that they
had to
didn't
put
know
your
was there?
yeah you had to put your flashlight
Yeah.
under your chin
Yeah,
and all that.
exactly. Yeah.
Um,
Remnants from childhood.
yeah, I didn't get a lot of that,
Mhm.
but we did a lot of day hiking versus overnight camping. So maybe that's the difference. I don't know, but I never thought about it. But it's interesting because in the sense that if you have low level anxiety, sometimes just reassuring yourself, it's not the pictures and the sounds or the images that your mind is making about the future is is kind of like worst case scenario because the critter brain wants to protect you.
Yeah.
And in order to protect you, it's going to go, hey, if we do this, this is kind of worst case scenario. You're going to die. So I'm going to make things feel uncomfortable for you. And I'm going to use the word rationalize. We have to, I don't know if that's the best word right now, but if you can kind of rationalize and just kind of understand that, okay, that is safety patterning in the brain. It's trying to protect me. The likelihood of that happening isn't that good. And for me, camping wise, it's like I'm going to buy bear spray when I get there.
Yeah.
And I know not to leave food in my tent, which this other person did. They left food in their tent, which is kind of like inviting a bear in to say hello. Unfortunately, so
Yeah.
there are certain things I will do in order to minimize that.
And that is a great indicator of why it's like, man, all this stuff's so tough, and why can't we just have it easier inside ourselves? And it also
Right.
serves this survival utility, right? I think rationalization is a great way to put it. I think they call it a reality testing too. Would be another way
Mm,
of like, oh, I'm
okay.
having this thought, let's reality test it, right?
Right.
Because when I've gone camping and backpacking, you do see bears sometimes, but the
Oh yeah.
likelihood of them being dangerous to
Yeah.
you is
And you
pretty
missed the
small
bear. You
statistically.
missed the bear when we were in Yosemite a couple years ago.
Ah,
We did that
yeah.
trip. Yeah. And the bear didn't care. The bear was not interested in myself. It
What
just
kind of
wanted to
bear
forage
was
for
it?
food. I have no
Yeah.
idea. And it was kind of a smaller bear too. It wasn't a full adult, but it was on the trail, and this was in
Yeah.
Hetch when we took the walk
Mhm.
along Hetch on the reservoir.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, we ended up separating
Yeah.
just because we went different directions. But yeah, on the way back, ran into a bear, and the bear just really didn't care. It was like, I'm looking for food, so I'm just going to
Yeah.
keep on doing my thing, and it let us do our thing. So
That's been my experience in Yosemite mostly. The bears just don't care. But
yeah,
I
unless
think
there's
that
food
a lot of
involved.
them are black bears, which are usually mostly okay. So,
Yeah,
but back to what we're talking about. Let me get. It's like, yeah, having bear spray is smart. Knowing protocols for camping that keep you safe, like hanging your food and not keeping it in your tent. Like
mm-hmm.
your mind is keeping you safe by keeping you alert to these things or causing you to seek information or be vigilant about it to a certain degree.
All right,
So it's natural and healthy to a certain degree. And then if it pushes too far out, if all you can think about every step you take is a bear, then it's not so good and your mind's not quite doing what it was meant to do. It's ramped up for some reason.
all right,
And with the social, coming back to being social, there's a lot of reasons why people might be apprehensive about that. I mean, if you are, I would encourage people to think about what it was like before. Is this
mm-hmm.
something that was true in your life before the pandemic? That's really important information. Because if it is, then there's other things to talk about and other things to consider. And if it's
All
not,
right,
then it might just be a matter of knocking the dust off of something and it'll be all right.
right,
And what you're pointing to with the visualization, we're almost never actually afraid of what we think we're afraid of. We're afraid of the emotions that it brings up inside of us.
Nice point.
Unless it's true life or death. It's actually, and this, of course, is more for our brains than our minds. Our minds are like, what do you mean? Of course, this thing is concerning. That feels real. And of course, it does feel real, but it's the chemical composition of the emotions that come up from the experience that either feel too bad, too overwhelming, too much, too whatever. In
Right,
some cases it might be too good, and we have beliefs that say we can't have it that good, and that is too guilt inducing or too shame inducing. So
mm-hmm.
it can get complicated,
Yeah,
but we're often not actually afraid or nervous about what we're nervous or afraid of. It's the experience of it that we're really avoiding at the end of the day,
right, right. Yeah.
which is a
Um,
weird way to think about it.
well, it is, and that experience is based on life experience, and most of that life experience that your system is referencing to is under 3 years of age. So,
Yeah,
just to add a whole nother level of like how interesting it is that the brain works and how simple it is when you really break it down. It's very simple, but when it plays out, it's a very complicated process just because there's so many unique. Everybody's so unique, and everybody's experience and everybody's interpretation of their experience is so unique, that I think that's where it really gets kind of complicated.
yeah,
Um, I did
and
want to
and
go ahead.
and as you said earlier, the intersection of that, which is all really true, and technology is like a new pickle in and of itself,
Right.
right? How much is technology was really one of the heroes, if I guess that's one way to put it, of the pandemic, right? Like Zoom to the
Hmm.
rescue, and Zoom happy hours and parties and connecting and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But it's really a huge issue before, and you know, uh, in elections in America, and I'm sure other places as well. And it's just like the way the thing we've created here interacts with our minds, which were already, kind of tricky and complicated enough without that. It's like it's an interesting intersection we'll have to explore more.
Right. Well, and then especially when you have people manipulating, um, based on the experience that they want you to have so that you stay on a platform longer. So if you've watched
Yeah.
The Social Experiment or anything like that,
Hmm.
you could go to Las Vegas, walk in the casino, and there's all kinds of little tricks that they do because they understand how the mind works. And I think when the mind gets overwhelmed or gets too much feedback or too much of one thing, it kind of throws the balance off on everything else. And that's kind of exactly what this article is talking about, that the social separation kind of throws, it makes sense that your mind's a little disconnected or not really feeling motivated to be socially bound right now because of the experience that you've had, and that your mind didn't have the balance of all the things that it really needs in order to stay mentally healthy. And it's like working out again. If you stopped running, you're not necessarily going to go run a marathon tomorrow. You got to be willing to do the little things. You got to be willing to start walking. You got to be willing to do a longer walk, and then maybe doing a light jog, and whatever it is, depending on how far you want to go. You got to be okay with starting over a little bit. And while that can be frustrating and maybe it feels new and uncertain, again, if it's low level anxiety or concern, fear, whatever it is that you're experiencing, just do your best to get out there and do it. I also wanted to touch on, you were talking about the basketball, and I don't know if I've mentioned it to you, and I just lost his name as I was going to mention it. Gentleman, he's in the UK, he's got his own TV show, and he's kind of a mentalist and neuroscience guy, but he does it for entertainment. And
is it Paul McKenna?
Nope, not Paul McKenna.
Dan Brown.
Yep. Good old Dan Brown. So he had a show.
First name? I can't remember. We were talking about him a while back. I don't think it's Dan.
I know it's Brown. I don't know if it's Dan Brown. That doesn't sound right, but Brown is correct. He had a show called Trick or Treat. And on the Trick or Treat show, he would, and these were people that had already signed an agreement. They said, yes, I want to be on the show. But he would go and find these people unsuspecting. So it's kind of one of those things, you sign your agreement, and then he's like, we'll be in touch with you if we're interested. Well, this one gal, I think it was, I forget, but he meets people in an interesting way because it's a TV production, so he's got to make it interesting. But
Darren Brown is the name.
Darren Brown, thank you.
I'm not actually familiar with him. I think I know him through you. But
yeah, I'll send you a video then, because this one, he's got a couple of them that are really cool. But this one, it's a gal. I want to say she's late 20s, early 30s, maybe. And he's all, you played the piano as a little kid, but you haven't played in years. And she's all, yes. He's all, great. 7 days from now, like literally 1 week, 7 days from now, you are going to be opening at XYZ Symphony. And you're going to play this complicated piano piece in front of them. And she's all, I am? She goes, you are. All right. But here's the fun part. You're not going to play the piano until 1 week from now when you sit down on that stage. Then you will play the piece. But until then, you will not play the piano. And just so you know, this is like a legit production, like an opera. So, it's not a Cracker Barrel circus act or something that she's going to be performing at. The guys are in their tuxes, the women are dressed up. It's a very nice place. Sure enough, a week goes by, and she gets up and she's beautifully dressed. She sits down, she does a couple of notes, and then she has to pause. And then she knocks the whole thing out, no problem. And what he did is he used hypnosis and visualization, and I'm sure he used a bunch of other techniques. These are the ones that I remember. And he actually taught her mind how to play the piano. Because when you're physically doing it, you're teaching the mind, right, what to do. Mm-hmm. So instead of physically doing it to teach the mind how to do it, he just went straight to the source. I kind of think of whatchamacallit, where they just plugged in the Matrix. It's like,
Oh yeah,
I need
yeah. You
I
get
need to learn how to fly an Apache helicopter. Okay, not a problem. Let me plug you in.
just
Download the
download it.
program.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm an expert. What's that? Jiu-jitsu? Plug you in. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's the mind that's doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what was really cool about what he was doing and a lot of the work that we do within NLP Marin as practitioners is that you're actually working at the mind level so that you don't have to work on it in the same way that I think a lot of what people would perceive work to be. Because once the mind understands, and the mind already knows what to do, everybody already has the tools, they have the capabilities, they just need to string it together. When you do that right in the core of the operating system, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Super
And the
cool.
mind's incredibly powerful and malleable. I remember listening to forget who it was, one of the founders of NLP back in the 70s talking about how you can basically teach a kid to do anything because their minds are so malleable. And like as adults, we have so many experiences and beliefs and identities about who we are and who we're not in the world, about what we can and can't do, that either help things or usually hinder things, depending. But kids have a lot less of that, and they can teach them to do almost anything.
Yeah, which is so cool. Actually, one of my nieces, yes, have to go through all the family when we were in Wisconsin. She's like 15, 16 months. So she's at that point where she's saying single words, dad, dog, those types of things, but you can't really communicate with her. And the preschool, or not the preschool, but the daycare that she goes to, they teach the kids sign language. So if you want food, food, and then I forget what drink is, and then it's like if you want more. But the favorite one that we all had fun one was all done. So if you wave both your hands, what it is, it's all done. So she's sitting down eating. Sometimes she might have 2 or 3 different food options in front of her, and you could stick one, and she kind of go, and you could go all done, and she would wave back all done. And it was so neat because you're able to communicate it a different way that her system was able to communicate. She was able to do some basic sign language before she was able to actually be able to communicate verbally what she needed to say. And then she could actually point, if she wanted something else, she could actually point to something else and then say, I want more. And it's just like, kids are incredibly smart. Kids are incredibly smart.
Yeah. Well, they got these unfettered brains.
Yeah.
And we were once kids, so it's useful to remember that.
Yeah. I still am, I think.
Yeah.
At least here I am.
Depending on the hour of the day or what's going on.
I think what is it, I don't think most men have grown up mentally past the age of 12, so fart jokes are still funny. People banging into each other, that physical humor is still funny to a lot of men. So
America's Funniest Home Videos was built on guys getting hit in the nuts with a football. I think that whole empire just straight from one shtick.
That it's funny you bring that up. Yeah. There were times where I felt, I don't know if it was depression necessarily, but there's times you just get in a funk where I'm just like, that was my go-to. Totally forgot that until you mentioned it. America's Funniest Home Video. I would find that. I'd watch a half-hour show. And afterwards, I wasn't always back 100%, but if I was down at 50%, it would get me at 75 or 80 or even 90%. Sometimes I'm like, it's exactly what I need. I just need a little humor in my life, a couple of people getting hit, and I feel better about myself. Thank you. Hey, good old AFE. I might have to watch some of that now.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what we all need.
On. I have no idea. Although the whole internet's basically turned into that show. So.
Yeah. Maybe that's what we all need in life. Before you try and go out, if you're feeling a little hesitant about going out in society, just watch a little AFV, and then you'll feel good. So use that
Yeah.
momentum of feeling good to step outside.
Yeah, and there's deep wisdom in it too. Like you really have to remember that it's better to be the one watching it than to be the one getting hit in the nuts with a football. I think
I don't
everyone needs
know,
to keep that in mind.
but I forget what was the grand prize though. It was like $100,000 or
Oh,
something,
yeah,
wasn't it?
yeah. I don't remember,
So
but it was
yeah,
not nothing. It was pretty good. Yeah.
yeah. I wouldn't do it intentionally, like jackass per se.
Hmm.
But yeah, if it was unintentional and it happened to get caught on camera, sure, I'll take my 100 grand. I got, I got neuro flexibility, neuroplasticity, and I've got physical plasticity,
You will
body
survive.
plasticity. Yeah, I will survive.
I don't know. Yeah, body, the regenerative power of the body. Who
Yeah,
knows?
yeah. All right, sir. Anything
But
else you want to talk about regarding our brain being
well,
broken because of 2020?
it's an interesting topic, this being social, because there's some really fundamental things that are just, if you think of you and I and yourself as like, or a person as an organism, there's like fundamental things an organism needs, or that a human needs, and it's
Right.
like oxygen, water. Um, those are really basic, and then there's other things that are just incredibly useful: exercise,
Mm-hmm.
being social,
Right.
um, pursuing things that are meaningful in your life,
Yeah.
whether that's professional, personal, or creative. Having a hobby that you're really passionate about. Like, there's just some general advice that applies to everyone, and this
Right.
is one of them. But you have to know yourself about it. It's like, how social do you need to be, and are you getting your needs met, or are you nervous and avoiding something? And
Right.
only, like, everyone has to know that for themselves, or seek an outside perspective to help them get clear if they really don't know the difference. Like,
Right.
for me personally, I didn't really feel the social squeeze all that much. Like, I didn't feel a yearning for it anytime, but that's
Mm-hmm.
just me personally.
Right.
I learned that it was more important than I thought, in a way. I was like, oh, it'd be a lot of fun to be going out this weekend instead of not. Like, I certainly
Right.
missed that, but it wasn't driving me crazy or causing some sort of harm internally.
Right.
But I'm just sharing that about myself to make the point that everyone's different. We kind of
Mm-hmm.
we do surveys and we talk about stuff and we talk about people broadly just because it has a utility. But you have to know yourself and you have to know what's important to you,
Right.
basically. And applying it directly for today, it's like, how social do you need to be, and
Right.
are you getting your needs met? Yes or no?
Yep.
Okay, what can you do about it, basically?
Right. Right. And I think a lot of time I was just reading an article, I forget, it had to do with I forget which. It was either a special forces or a Green Beret or somebody like that, where they do like Hell Week. And
Mm-hmm.
so the guy was talking about the mental approach that he took for Hell Week, and I forget if it was Hell Week specifically, but you get the idea where it's basically you don't sleep. They, they have you do all kinds of physical activities. They try and physically break, not physically break you, but mentally break you,
Yeah.
because they need to know who's mentally tough in order to become whatever special ops division this was. And the guy that they were talking to, he goes, if I looked at it at 7 days and you're only 2 days in, and I'm like, or you're already emotionally drained, you're physically drained,
Mm-hmm.
to some level, and if you're like, I gotta last another 5 days, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. But he goes, every 6 hours there was food. So every 6 hours they got a break. So he goes, for him, he wasn't worried about how many days. He just had to get to the next 6 hours. He just needed that. All he focused on was that next 6 hours. Okay,
Yeah,
next
brilliant.
6 hours, I'll get a break and I'll be fine. and I get to re-energize a little bit. Okay, I just got to go one more 6 hours. And that's where he was at. So he understood the long game, that it was, he's in it for this long, but he pulled his focus back, and his mental attention was on was just the next 6 hours, because he knew that was accomplishable. That he knew he could do. He didn't know if he could last a week, but he knew he could last 6 hours.
Wow. Yeah. That's a great example. I'd love to hear more about who that was, or listen to him talk about it. Cause
I would have to find it.
I mean, that's one of the smartest tactics for accomplishing anything is we have huge goals, and then you have to like, okay, what's the first step? What's the second step?
Right.
Can you focusing on that makes it much more manageable from a mental perspective and a physical one.
Yeah. Just chunking it down.
Yeah.
Chunk it down in small bite-sized pieces, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, cool. Next week, we're going to talk about something fun. I have no idea what it is. I have it here on my fancy spreadsheet, though.
Talking about the old work and jobs and what is going on in the world.
We're going to talk about the revolution. What's going on?
Yeah.
Should be an interesting one.
Is the zeitgeist changing? I don't know. We'll have to find out.
We'll have to find out. But that will be next Tuesday here on I'm not even going to try and do the beep, the No Fucks Given podcast. Did I lose my ears? We've got some music going. Go ahead. Were you going to do a little special something into the microphone?
I'll say fuck, and you have to guess when I'm going to do it to hit the button.
Just a second. All right, I'm ready.
It could happen at any fucking time. Some things are fundamental for me. I think I said it the first day. The mistimed beep is a classic joke, and it will never not be funny for me personally.
I'm telling you, that 12-year-old just
exactly
makes that 12-year-old happy.
It's like, God, would you cut it out? You guys are so lame. Like, I can't. It's just always
too
funny.
Good. Yeah, it's always too good. All righty, sir.
All right, Ryan.
It's been fun, everybody out there. Thank you for following, joining. Feel free to leave a comment. Let us know what you think. Anything you'd like us to talk about or not talk about. We'd love to hear from you in the comments.